made basket by the Hawks, and they're getting oops on the other end.
Caw-caw. That's my sad caw for the Hawks. Caw-caw.
And now, the Low Post.
Welcome to the Low Post Podcast live from Los Angeles, California. It's time, speaking of California, for a run through good Western Conference teams who don't play in California, not including the Phoenix Suns. Sorry, Phoenix. We'll talk about you more when we get more of a sample with your big three. But there are several good teams that don't play in California in the Western Conference that may not be at the top of the standings, although one is, but they're right squeezed nicely in the middle, and they're all playing well. And Tim MacMahon is an expert on all of them. How are you, sir?
Howdy, partner. Doing just fine. How are you, Zach?
I am good. Let me tell you a story, Tim MacMahon. I looked it up on my phone. It was in August, maybe September. It was in September, I think. And I jogged my memory as I was watching the Utah Jazz win yet another game the other day to go to 22-20 now, up to 9th in the West, not just scrounging for play-in. They're in the play-in, baby, and they're surging. 9th in the West, 13-3 in their last 16 games. And you're damn right we're leading the Low Post podcast with the Utah Jazz. The ratings will go in the toilet, but we're doing it anyway. And
What's going on in Utah, baby?
I texted, I looked at my phone, I texted Will Hardy, and here's the text. I look forward to being too low on you guys in the preseason and you being 20-15, 30 games into the season, 35 games into the season. And I asked Will, can I share that story? And he replied like LOL or whatever. We were just spitballing, catching up over the summer. And I texted him, I was like, that actually wasn't far off. I took the under on the Jazz. I felt good about it. And now they're 22-20 and they can't lose starting 0. This is very unusual for an allegedly rebuilding team who traded their 2 foundational pieces for 9,000 draft picks. And it turns out an all-star caliber, maybe all-NBA caliber player, Lauri Markkanen, and a solid starter in Colin Sexton, who people forget was, along with Agbaji, he was like the last line in the Donovan Mitchell trade. And I texted him like, that ain't too far off. Here we are, Utah Jazz, man. Starting 0. Oh, that was the point. Starting 0 players, a rebuilding team starting 0 players that they drafted. Now that's cheating a little bit because they signed Simone Fontecchio, household name. We just use Simone. They signed him as an undrafted free agent, but these are just, and they're 2 of them are players the Bulls received in the Jimmy Butler trade, which feels like 10 years ago, Lauri Markkanen and Chris Dunn, who, damn it, I had Chris Dunn on my all-defense second team in 2020, which was the last time he got real minutes for the Chicago Bulls. And I said then, and I will say now, I am not sure there is a better guard defender in the world than Chris Dunn. I don't know what the hell is happening with this team, but they're kicking people's ass, and I'm hoping you can enlighten me a little bit, because this team in their last 16 games is 6th in offense, 9th in defense, 4th in net rating, and I absolutely love it. They're fun to watch, and that's where what's happening, Tim? How did this happen?
I mean, they've won 6 straight. They've scored 130 plus in 3 straight games. That is a first in franchise history. Thanks for ESPN stats and info for that little gem. And I mean, nobody saw this coming. They were 7-16, and I do a weekly radio hit in Utah with Spencer Checketts, and I feel like every week I just kept repeating the same line. Hey, rebuilds are not without pain, and that certainly seemed to be the trajectory that this season was on. But you mentioned Will Hardy, and if the Jazz end up in the playoffs, he has to get serious Coach of the Year consideration. He is doing a hell of a job, and it took a quarter plus of the season for him kind of to figure out, okay, how do all these pieces fit? And they're doing, like, Walker Kessler was one of their untouchables going to the trade deadline last year. He's coming off the bench. Why is that? Because if John Collins is going to be getting minutes, and you're not just going to bench a veteran. I know they didn't give up anything in the trade for him, but you're not just going to bench a proud vet who's still productive, if not, although flawed. But if he's going to be in the lineup, he has to play center offensively. So they've kind of broken those two up. Jordan Clarkson was hurt for a while, kind of when they got rolling. He was out with a hamstring. He's come back, and he had never come off the bench for a Will Hardy team until he came back from this injury. He's back in that six-man, he's a former six-man of the year who's back in that role and playing as well as he ever has, as a playmaker, which is certainly not something that he has a reputation to be, in addition to a score. Colin Sexton, I think it took Will a good year and change to kind of figure out how to maximize this guy. But you mentioned he's been in the starting lineup. I think he started the last 17 games, or 13-4 in that stretch. He's putting up 20 plus per game pretty efficiently. Fontecchio, he is the one wing-sized wing.
They have no wing. It's unbelievable. They have no wings on the whole team other than Fontecchio. Agbaji masquerades as a 3 on their bench mob, which we'll talk about. But it is interesting that they just have to finagle these like wing minutes from almost nothing. But he's good. Fontecchio's a good basketball player.
And they figured, Will figure out, hey, it helps having a legitimate size wing who plays hard defensively, who is he's not, I'm not going to sit here and say he's a wing stopper, but he's a solid wing defender who, a little bit of playmaking, shoots well enough, moves. He just kind of fits in that starting lineup. And Lauri Markkanen is a stud. Like, he's just a stud. Rick Carlisle went so far as to compare him to Dirk last night. And Rick, I've been around Rick long enough to know that Rick is prone to some hyperbole. He'll give you, especially when it comes to player comparisons, but he is a 7-foot shooter who he's close to 50, 40, 90 since he's been in Utah, putting up 23 plus per game this year, 25 per game last year. He is as efficient of a and they've got him playing power forward. He has center size, wing skills, and his natural position is power forward. They got him back playing that. But I think they've got a lot of quality pieces. It took Will a while to figure out how they all fit, and the sum is definitely greater than, if you add the parts up individually right now.
So about Fontecchio said he can do a little bit of playmaking, and I think that's actually quite apt. So just to review, their starting 5 for people who have not dialed into the red-hot Utah Jazz is Chris Dunn, Colin Sexton, Simone Fontecchio, Lauri Markkanen, and John Collins. That's the starting 5 of a good basketball team in 2024. How that happened, who the hell knows? I'm happy for John Collins, by the way, because there was like a weird report about a month ago that they were like totally off of John Collins. And I remember calling around being like, how could they be this off? It's like the season just started. And my whole thing with John Collins is, look, love him, hate him. He's got flaws. He's been on the trade block for a million years. He is a raw talent upgrade for the Jazz. That was like a complete talent gift for free. And that starting 5 does not have one even like A- level playmaker in it. Like Colin Sexton's passing drove everyone in Cleveland bananas. Lauri Markkanen, it's kind of the one weakness of his game, but he's getting better at it. He's like a 2 assists a game. But collectively, they can all do a little bit of it, and that adds up to like enough. And the number one thing that lineup has done, no pun intended, because Chris Dunn and Colin Sexton and Markkanen are all pretty strong one-on-one players, is the Jazz got their turnovers under control. And that was what was holding them back earlier. They were throwing the ball all over the gym. It's now a manageable number. And then their bench mob, they have a 5-man bench mob. Keontae George, who was the leading offender of their turnovers earlier in the season. Jordan Clarkson, Agbaji, Kelly Olynyk, point center Kelly Olynyk, and Walker Kessler coming off the bench, which, as you indicated, is kind of a gutsy move to make. Mm-hmm. Will discovered, I can't play Collins and Kessler together. They do the same thing on offense. We're going to have to figure it out. And I think what that's done for Keontae George is he's flanked by a shooting big in Olynyk, who does a lot of the playmaking. He's kind of the co-point guard. And another big playmaker in Clarkson, another high-usage playmaker in Clarkson. No one is overstressed on offense anymore. Least of all the rookie point guard, who I think is going to be good. I like that kid a lot.
Well,
And-
and so does Will Hardy, and they say lead guard. Point guard is not a term that's
Oh,
used.
whatever.
in
Okay, sure.
Scottsdale,
Sure, Utah.
Just telling you.
And Kessler, look, offensively, he hasn't made the jump that they hoped. His minutes are down. He's coming off the bench. He's still a beast on defense. Opponents are shooting 45% at the rim when he's around. That's one of the best figures in the league. The whole thing works.
Mm-hmm.
And they have been a trade machine team all season long. Like, even teams calling them about Markkanen. You said it last week. I said it last week. Like, I would be absolutely blown away if they trade Markkanen. Here's the point that I've reached with them. Their trade of Mike Conley last year was a death blow to their own team. And they knew it. Like, they were not
Correct.
surprised that that was the case. I don't know what role player trade would have a similar impact on their current team. It would maybe be Olynyk, who's got interest. Like I mentioned, the Clippers is an Olynyk team last week. There's going to be a million teams interested in him. Maybe it's Sexton. I kind of hope they trade nobody, none of their rotation guys, because I think they're pretty good. Sexton has 2 years and $37 million left on his contract. He's 25. He's a good player. Markkanen's only 26. He's a very good player. He's an all-star, all-NBA level. I don't know if he's going to make the all-star team, but if they keep winning, he's going to.
Yeah.
And Olynyk, look, he's an expiring. He has value. Can you trade him and it's not like crippling to your second unit? Can Fontecchio kind of become the new Olynyk? Maybe. But look, I tried to think of comps for a team that conceived of itself as a rebuilding team and just sort of like accidentally became a decent team. And I can list you some comps later. I kind of like that they can build up from the middle like this, knowing, hey, if Cleveland ever takes a downturn, if Minnesota ever takes a downturn, we got bites at the apple from those teams. Like, I know they envisioned a scenario where their own pick netted them a great chance at the next Utah Jazz superstar.
Right.
I kind of like this team as is. I kind of want them to keep it because I think they can build up from the middle. I think that's a route you can go, particularly with the new lottery odds that are less favorable for tanking. I think this is totally fine. I kind of want them to do nothing.
Well, one comp for a team like that is last year's Utah Jazz until they made the trade just before the trade deadline. And it was clear that the intention for the rest of the year was not to prioritize winning at that point. And they end up in the top 10. And that's what's crazy. They end up in the top 10. And the rookie they took at 9 overall, Taylor Hendricks, has primarily been a G League player this year.
And by the way, when he's played in the NBA, he's looked good and particularly ready on, like, I like him too.
Well, defensively, he's got a chance to be really, really good. Offensively, he's got a ways to go. Kind of the vision for him is a bigger, better version of Robert Covington, but there's a ways to go to get there. This year, honestly, certainly when they were 7-16 and even going into the season, I thought the question down the stretch for the Jazz is going to be, hey, are they giving up their pick this year to Oklahoma City? It's top 10 protected. They're a little while away from that at this point. And I last year shows you, and the conversations that I've had around the league and with people with the Jazz back this up, Danny Ainge is not going to get sentimental about a competitive team. Right. It's still the big picture's still at the front of their mind. He's going to be making calls, et cetera, et cetera. But Danny Ainge, there's been plenty of times where he's been on the phone a whole bunch, or in this case, Justin Zanik's handling most of the conversations, and then not pulled the trigger at the deadline. That's certainly a possibility. You mentioned Olynyk. There's a ton of teams that would love to have Kelly Olynyk. I was talking to somebody with the Jazz who said everybody wants Kelly Olynyk. That doesn't mean someone's going to pay what it takes to get him. There ain't going to be a bake sale. We can guarantee that if they're making trades for value. And like you said, with Markkanen, there definitely was some buzz about that. Just the fact that he's not labeled as untouchable.
I'm keeping him. I'm not trading him. You got to give me like 5 first-round picks. He's
Brother,
26 and he's really good, and he makes everybody around. He's not a great he's not a passer, but
Right.
because of his shooting and his positional versatility and his movement off the ball, and these corner pin down sets they run for him are killing everybody, in part because he is playing with a new physicality this season, going at bigger defenders in the paint and guarding centers. Guard Miles Turner, guard Anthony Davis in recent games. Like he's like a floating helpful player, just moving around, is shooting. I'm not moving him. I'm not.
He's an athletic 7-footer who can shoot, put it on the floor, and finish. Those don't grow on trees. And I won't say the name that was brought up, but I was talking to somebody of the Jazz, and I said, yeah, 5 first-round picks, and
Okay, 5 might be hyperbole, but I'm just not.
Well,
I'm not looking to trade him.
I said an ex-player, a nice young player, is kind of the headliner of the package, and they were like, "No, not that guy, this other guy." And the name that they mentioned made me gasp. All that to say, if Lauri Markkanen is traded, it will be for a package that would have to blow.
No, I'm going to come out. They're not going to trade him. They're just not.
That's what I'm telling you. It would be like, you would not believe the kind of return it would take to get Lauri Markkanen.
Now,
I wouldn't waste my breath making that phone call. I'll put it to you like that.
If they get offered like a good first for Kelly Olynyk, not like a top 15 protect, if they get offered a good first, you have to think about it. And I think they could cobble enough together to kind of replace his role on the team. But other than that, I like to see, and I was thinking of comps, like the kind of classic build from the middle teams are the Pacers, right? Of the mid 2010s. The Pacers never famously picked like higher than 10th for a million years. The Blazers, when LaMarcus Aldridge left, they won 44 games the next year because they already had Damian Lillard in-house. Now, Lowry now is like roughly equivalent to what Damian Lillard was then. Damian Lillard was 25 in that season. Yeah. The other team, but look, it's hard to do. Even Oklahoma City, it feels like they were bad for like a hot second, and now they're good again. They were bad for 2 years, and they got Giddey and Chet out of it like bottoming out is a thing that happens for multiple seasons still. The team I thought about was like the random Raptors team in 2013-14 that had Rudy Gay and traded Rudy Gay to the Kings for a bunch of bench players. At that point, DeMar DeRozan was 24, had never made an all-star team, made his first all-star team that season. Kyle Lowry was 27, had never made an all-star team. The team had not made the playoffs as with that core of players. And they kind of accidentally became good. And I think most Raptors fans would be like, yeah, that was like, we didn't get over the hump. We became LeBronto, right. Like LeBron eliminated us over and over. Like that was a legit good team, and we had fun, and we kind of built from the middle around those two guys. That was one of the teams I thought of. And I think Utah can follow that same path around Markkanen. Now, do they have a second guy as good as Lowry? Maybe not, but they've got a lot of good players.
Yeah, and Keontae George is definitely the young guy who is in the rotation now that they're looking at as having real, I don't want to say star upside, but like high level starter upside. Walker Kessler needs to get better offensively as a screener, as his ability to catch the ball. There's a lot of development to be had there, but he's already an elite defensive player. They've got some pieces in place, and as you mentioned, Sexton, I mean, we'll see what happens. Age-wise, he fits the timeline, and the man can put the ball in the basket. He's not a point guard. They're not asking him to be a point guard. He's putting the ball in the basket at a high level. And they just, for a team of kind of, I don't want to say leftovers or misfit parts, but, a team of guys, most of whom have bounced around a little bit, that's kind of been thrown together. I think they've got a really good culture, and there's, right now they've got 10 guys while they've been on the stretch, 10 guys that are playing right around between 20 and 30 minutes. And there's no whining, there's no moping, there's no, complaining about touches or minutes or all those kind of things. Walker Kessler's not pouting because he's coming off the bench. Clarkson's not crying about, hey, I established myself as a starter, all those kind of things. And they're letting Will Hardy coach them. And I do think they're overachieving right now, but that's a credit to not just the coaches, but to the players who are willing to go along with this and also to adapt. It's not like the rotation's set in stone on a game-to-game basis. They're willing to buy in and adapt on a night-to-night basis, and that's not always the case in the NBA.
Lauri Markkanen's having a great season. Listen to him talk on defense, so you can hear it even over the TV. He's talking veer. You hear him say that a lot. That means veer back on the pick and roll, like late switch. Chris Dunn's the best in the league at that. Anyway, let's switch gears and talk about your hometown team, the Dallas Mavericks. Again, kind of just floating in another world in the middle of the West, not receiving a ton of attention. I think it is a home run for them to be 24-17 so that's 41 games. Kyrie and Luka have played together in 20 of them. And they're 24-17. 8th in offense, 18th in defense. As you have pointed out recently, they've been a borderline top 10 defense now for the last month. They are one of 5 teams in the NBA to, as we are recording this early in the morning on January 16th in LA, to not have any lineup of 5 players crack 100 minutes so far this season.
They've had 23 starting lineups in 41 games.
The other 4 teams are Charlotte, Memphis, Miami, who has just been injured up and down, and the Spurs. So that's the company you're in with not having a lineup play that many minutes together. Kyrie is absolutely balling out at an all-star level, carried them to wins over the Knicks and the Pelicans in the last 4 days, 26-5-5. And they do play, it's not like beautiful synergy, but when they're on the floor together, the offense is really, really good. It's interesting that we have reached 41 games. What is the starting lineup of this team? Like, do we know what everyone is? Like, we know 3. We know 3. The 2 stars in Lively.
I can tell you they're 5. And by the way, you mentioned 20 games, Luka and Kyrie, 16 with Lively with that duo. I mean, that's their core 3 guys. Lively is part of that.
Who are the other 2 starters?
They're 11-5 in those games. Derek Jones Jr. on a minimum, and Dante Exum, who I think I might have my exceptions on a slice of an exception, a $3 million a year player. They got to the point
that's my guess. That's my guess as of now.
No, I'm telling you, that's the plan. Like that's Jason Kidd on the record. That is the plan. They got to the realization of, hey, we want Exum and Jones, their 2 best on-ball defenders. Exum has become a solid 3-point shooter. That's something that happened when he went back to Europe or over to Europe for a couple of years. And they like having that third guy with some playmaking ability in that starting lineup. And they came to that realization because Exum was so damn good playing with Luka while Kyrie was out with that heel contusion that sidelined him for most of December. And so, hey, Kyrie's back. We think we've figured out this 5-man starting lineup that's really going to fit. Here we go. Boom, Utah. And then Exum got hurt in the first half of that game. He has
they can't let him play in Utah. It's cursed. Don't let Dante Exum set foot on the floor in Utah.
Yeah, and at first they said heel contusion, and then they changed it to a sprain of the plantar. There's a minor tear in it, which, it's going to take a little bit of time. I don't know exactly how long. Jones actually sat out last night with a contusion. Luke has been out with a sprained ankle. I mean, they've been killed by injuries. But that's the 5-man starting lineup that they plan to go forward with. And Jay Kidd said, well, we're going to California. Hopefully that sea breeze can help us get healthy.
That's right. I'm going to see them tomorrow against the Lakers, I think. That's exciting.
Yeah, but that's the group. And, they got Maxi Kleber back. He missed 2 months with a dislocated pinky toe that kept on popping out. They got him back.
I'm sorry, the toe kept on popping out? That sounds horrible.
Yeah, it's not a pleasant thing. It's like, how do you miss 2 months with a toe injury? Because it keeps popping out of place. That's how. Every time they thought he was close to coming back, it seemed like the thing popped out. But he played the last couple of games, and that's gives them some flexibility there. We all know what he meant to their West Finals run. To that team being a top 7 defense in the league. Grant Williams now coming off the bench. Um, it's an If they are an average to above average defensive team, which they have been for a while, and they've got their 3 main guys healthy, and I am counting Derek Lively II as a main guy, then they have a chance to be dangerous in the West.
No, absolutely. Like, again, the race for the top 6, that's what we're talking about today. Is like I think the top 4 is going to be what it is right now. And then the race for those last 5 and 6 spots is going to be fierce. Dallas is dangerous, and they're dangerous. Like, they could win a round and be a dangerous second round opponent to one of the heavyweights in the West. Like, that's how good their 2 best offensive players are. And if they have Lively, I want to give him a little love for his offense, and it's so much beyond dunking. My favorite thing about him is you trap one of those dudes on the pick and roll, he catches the ball 14 feet from the rim. He is not passing by default. It doesn't even matter if the help defender coming into him is a bigger guy. He can put the ball on the floor and hit a little hook shot. He's shooting 57% on floater range shots. Like, he's got a nice little soft touch.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned Exum and Jones. That's what I was thinking too, and I didn't know Jay Kidd had said it. That lineup has only played 26 minutes together. They're plus 35 in 26 minutes, which is kind of like mathematically impossible to be that much of a plus in that little time. But what has happened amid these absences is Grant Williams has kind of been injured and banged up as an ankle injury. He'll be what he is, which will be useful. I thought he was going to start. They thought he was going to start. It hasn't turned out that way. That's fine. He'll play big minutes for them, decent minutes. Jaden Hardy has showed some signs of life recently. Josh Green has showed real signs of life recently. All of a sudden, they look pretty deep.
Well, and you haven't mentioned Tim Hardaway Jr., who's a legit 6th man of the year candidate.
18 a game.
Well, and while Luka's been out with a sprained ankle, Kyrie's been cooking, so has Hardaway. He's averaged 32 and change very efficiently over these 3 games. That's why they've won 2 of them.
The tricky part is playing Tim, Kyrie, and Luka together is going to hurt your defense, but they'll do it here and there. And Kleba, you mentioned, look, he unlocks some flexibility. Like, even in the Pelicans game yesterday, there was a lineup where I think Grant Williams was at center. They may have put Grant and Kleba together. There were 5 shooters on the floor, and Kyrie just drove to the rim. There was no big man waiting at the rim. You talk about Grant Williams and Derek Jones Jr. at the 4 and the 5. They played all 3 of Grant Williams, Derek Jones Jr., and Kleba together for a couple minutes in that game. It's just an interesting team. I think this team could be good and dangerous if they can get their defense in order, which they have been. Now, the interesting thing is Twitter people, I've not heard any credible people have speculated about their fit as a Pascal Siakam team. I don't really see it because I don't see what salary they have to send out that any of these teams are going to want. Like, Kleba's got too much time left on his contract. Richaun Holmes has a player option for next season that nobody's going to want. Hardaway is not expendable. He's too good, for $18 million a year. They do have 1 first-round pick and 3 swaps that they can trade. Someone mentioned Jeremy Grant to me as a sort of, like, because his contract is so long, he's gettable at a lower price. Is that a Mavs fit? I'm interested in your thoughts on that. Siakam, and just, if they just wait till the summer, all of a sudden they have 3 picks that become tradable. So maybe they just do nothing. But is there an upgrade out there that you've heard rumblings of?
Not necessarily rumblings. It's interesting. Jeremy Grant was mentioned to me yesterday, and it wasn't from anybody like in the Mavs front office or coaching staff, but somebody's around the team. And that's interesting. I like with Siakam, you mentioned, first of all, like, what does the trade look like? Can they make the best trade for Siakam? But then there's just straight up, there's concerns about Siakam wants a max. You've already got 2 guys at 40, in that 40 mil range. And in today's NBA, going forward with 3 guys making 40 mil plus is very
Tough sledding.
difficult. Yeah. So, there's concerns there. I would prefer, if you're going to lock yourself into a number 3 guy, that it's more of a shooting threat. Because look, if you're playing with Kyrie and Luka, you will get open threes.
Well,
Not a
Pascal's been
coincidence.
on fire from 3 for the last month. I just can't figure out. His true level is probably like league average or a little bit worse. That's probably where he is
Yeah. I certainly
as a
expect
3-point shooter, to be clear.
I certainly expect the Mavericks to kick a whole bunch of tires. Like every time a GM comes through town, Nico Harrison, the Mavs GM's over there huddling up with them and chit chat and all those sorts of things. They're going to have a lot of conversations. There was a desperation leading into the trade deadline last year. They got fortunate that Kyrie Irving became available and at a discount price because of a variety of issues.
And by the way, you and I did not like that trade for them. And I said on this podcast reacting to that trade, I'm just on the school of thought where like I'm not trading for Kyrie Irving, giving everything that's happened so far. And the key is always so far with Kyrie. Like we got to eat crow on that. He's been really good and available, and there's been like really nothing noise wise. Like he is living up to that trade and that contract easily for them.
Well, and he got a lot of flack last year because the Mavericks fell apart after that trade, and anybody watching that team understood Kyrie's not the reason this team fell apart. And this year, he did have the I think he missed whatever it was, 2.5, 3 weeks with the injury. Hey, guys get hurt, but I talked to him a little bit after the game yesterday after they beat the Pelicans, and he is at peace. He is comfortable. He is happy. I have not heard anything but good things about him as a teammate. The young guys on the roster love him. They look up to him. They consider him to be kind of a role model type of guy, and he's hooping. I mean, he is, during his homestand, he averaged 34 points efficiently. He's rebounding. He's diving on the floor. The Mavericks are extraordinarily happy that they were able to pull that off. And, I mentioned the desperation last year. They're fortunate that the Bulls weren't shopping Zach LaVine last year because the Mavericks wanted them to. The Mavericks wanted to make a move for Zach LaVine, and I think they'd be much worse off now if they would have done that. But as when I say there's not nearly as much desperation, that's because the Mavericks tanking late last season, embarrassing as it was, shameful as it was absolutely the right move and has paid massive dividends. Because if you are looking at why they're as competitive as they've been so far this season and why you can convince yourself that the arrow is pointing up, I would introduce you to a 7'1", super athletic, hardworking, low maintenance big man named Derek Lively II. He has been worth every penny of that fine they had to pay for tanking and the embarrassment that they endured and all that. He's also the exact kind of big that Luka Doncic has been craving. He's never going to clog things up. I need post touches. He's going to screen. He's going to roll. You can throw it up to the third deck, and he's going to be able to catch lobs. You mentioned he's got some playmaking ability, even in the short roll. He's going to rebound. He's going to run, protect the rim. Everything he does enhances Luka's brilliance, and all of his strengths, Luka can maximize. And he came in. They didn't think after Summer League he was going to be ready. He made such massive strides in the 2.5 months between Summer League and the start of camp. His impact in winning as a rookie, and he's never going to be like a primary offensive option type of player, but he has a chance to be a star role player for sure.
Yeah, they got a couple of those primary option kind of players on their team, including a perennial MVP candidate who's playing better defense this year than ever in his life, Luka Doncic. And Omax Prosper has barely played. That was the other big first round pick they had. And he fits the template of kind of what they need in theory anyway. I don't know that I've heard a name, even just spitballing like you and I were about Jeremy Grant. Like, I'm not rushing into, I don't think Jeremy Grant is good enough for me to rush in to that contract if I'm the Mavs. As much as I might be hungry to win now, because I got to win now guys, I don't know that the right name is out there. On Siakam, first of all, Siakam's people had to be smiling ear to ear when Detroit cleared even more cap space in the Marvin Bagley salary dump to the Wizards, which everyone's excited about the cap space for the Pistons. Great. We'll see what they do with the cap space. Hasn't worked out there with cap space in previous regimes. The new regime, we'll see what happens. Well, it really hasn't worked out for this regime either, but give them another shot. How about eating the mulligan on the Marvin Bagley contract, which was inexplicable the moment it was? Everyone around the league was like, what, 3 years, 36 million for Marvin Bagley? How did that happen? And now, whatever years later, months later, whatever it is, they have to trade 2 second-round picks and a useful-ish role player just to get out of that contract. How many big men contracts are the Pistons going to have to eat picks to get out of in the next 5 years?
I'll say this, as far as Marvin Bagley, the third mulligans go, this is not the most painful one. I would say the Kings taking him a pick before Luka is a bit more painful.
Anyway, no Kings besmirching here. I think you guys talked on the Hoop Collective last week. I listened. I have a bone to pick with you, by the way, off air.
I remember taking a shot. I don't remember exactly what
took a shot at me. It was a good-natured shot, but it was a shot. You mentioned, like, look, Pascal's next contract is baked in to whatever team decides to trade for him, and I do think he's going to get traded. I don't know when or where, but it seems like that's where we're heading. We talk to people around the league. Whoever trades for him is going to have some idea of his desire to resign there and some idea of the price they are willing to pay to get him.
An idea of the price.
Yeah, it might be the whole damn thing. Obviously, if he gets traded from the Raptors, you can't make all NBA and get this super max. That you can only get that on your homegrown team or whatever. If you're asking me to bet on a trade outcome, I still would bet on the Pacers right now. I don't know what the price will be, where and when, but they're the one team that's been kind of consistently in there. But look, if any of these teams thought maybe we can, and then there's the whole leverage game we play with the Raptors, right? If we can just get him in free agency, we're not going to give you everything now. Well, Detroit just now loomed itself as a threat in free agency. Whether Siakam would actually want to go there or not, who knows? But that would be my bet on them. But anyway, that's a trade for the next 3 weeks. Tim MacMahon, any closing thoughts on your hometown Dallas Mavericks?
Well, I look forward to at some point seeing them healthy, and I'll be honest, they are much better, not necessarily more interesting, but they're much better than I anticipated they'd be this season.
They're better and more interesting to me. For them to be 24-17 is a home run given their health issues.
I feared that the interest would not be a positive. They were very interesting last season. They weren't good.
Yeah, that's true. But the interest on that kind of, like, you can only yell at them so often for tanking and being bad. Like, it kind of expires. This is more interesting. It can go in a number of different directions. Tim MacMahon, thank you, sir. We'll see you around.
I appreciate it. Adios, amigos.
Continuing our tour of Western Conference teams who are good and do not play in California. Hey, the number one team in the West. Whoa, 28-11, still first in the West. The Minnesota Timberwolves. Jon Krawczynski, I think we broke our streak of talking nicely about the Wolves and then something horrible happening. I think that streak has ended. The Wolves are 28-11. 20th in offense. We got to talk about that. Yeah. Still first in defense and first by a lot, coming off a big win over the Clippers. How are you, sir?
I'm good, Zach. Good to be back here. And yeah, you're right. It's these are weird times now. It feels like streaks are breaking. It feels like curses are lifting a little bit. We still got a long way to go, but it's a different feel around Minnesota these days with this basketball club for sure.
Can I tell you my favorite moment from that win over the Clippers?
Please do.
And you talked about ghosts of the past and all this. And I don't know if I'm on high alert for Clippers ghosts of the past, because the Clippers are like a cursed NBA franchise, although I don't really believe in that. But remember when they got James Harden, Paul George on Podcast P with Paul George, started talking about lobby, like all the lobs that are coming. And like my spine tingled because that echoed the Lob City thing that Blake Griffin's celebrating about how it's going to be Lob City. And that team was good, but ultimately fell short against the Minnesota Timberwolves 2 nights ago in Minnesota. The Clippers bench mob, which consisted of PJ Tucker, Bones Highland, and Ivica Zubac, who missed the game, and Ivica Zubac never misses games. They delighted in Rudy Gobert's first half struggles from the foul line, which included back-to-back air balls, I believe, on one trip. And they hammed it up, man. They like linked arms on the bench. They did the thing where you laugh in anticipation of the second shot, and when it's an air ball, you kind of fall out of your seat dramatically. And they laughed and they hammed it up, and Rudy saw it. And after the second air ball, Rudy looked over there and gave him a little nod, like, I see it. And at the end of the game, when the Clippers were trying to rally, they hacked Gobert on purpose, and he went 4 for 4 down the stretch in the last 90 seconds of the game. I loved it. It was sweet vengeance. And then I remembered, wait a second, I remember another Clippers team hamming it up like this when an opposing player missed free throws. And you know what it was? It was in the bubble when Damian Lillard, of all people, missed 2 free throws with the Blazers down 1, and the Blazers like had to win every game or so. I can't remember and it was Patrick Beverley in street clothes and Marcus Morris and Paul George. And Patrick Beverley did like the laughing, falling over thing. And we know what happened with the Clippers in the bubble. And John, starting to get worried that the basketball gods are sending signals. But hats off to Rudy Gobert. That was a fun moment, and you wrote about it after the game.
Yeah, I did. And, there was 2 things that stuck out about that moment, because one is that Rudy absolutely did see it. He processed it. He kind of filed it away for later in the game, and he knocks down all 4 free throws in the clutch moments. And also, if you remember, Zach, Russell Westbrook, who was actually filmed like turning his back from the Rudy on the free throw line, and a fan was filming him. He's saying, "Tell me what happens. I can't even watch it." Russell Westbrook missed 2 wide open layups.
Noted elite jump shooter Russell Westbrook.
Yes, missed 2 wide open layups, one in the third quarter that would have kind of helped get them closer, and then right at the end, the last play of the game, just bricked a wide open layup. And so absolutely karma coming back to the Clippers in that case. And not only did Rudy hit all of those free throws, he was dominant in the fourth quarter, scoring, rebounding, blocking shots, controlling the game like he's done all season long. And I can tell you that the Timberwolves very much enjoyed seeing it play out the way that it did in the locker room after the game.
Poor Rudy, man. Like, why? Is it because he's tall and a little bit awkward? Is it because he's French? And I don't it's there. Rudy is like the NBA's most decorated punching bag in history. I was going to say punchline, but he's not a punchline because he's a very good player. He's going to be probably going to make the Hall of Fame. I mean, you don't win 3 or 4 defensive players of the year. You get in the Hall of Fame. Unless you're on his team, he becomes this target for mockery that like everybody just mocks him all the time. And he just has to grin. And then now look, he brought it on himself a little bit with the COVID stuff and licking the phones or whatever he did, or breathing on the phones. But man, all that guy, he's trying his best from the foul line. Everyone's laughing at him. And then he comes back. He has been the best defensive player in the league this year. He is the front runner for defensive player of the year, and he should be. And this team, like, their defense has stood the test of time. This is a legit elite number 1 by 2 whole points per 100 possessions, which is a lot. It's a very good defense. And you wrote a great piece. I want you to expound upon this a little bit. People remember, if there are 2 concerns about the Wolves as like, okay, now it's going to be interesting, John. You've never covered, I don't think, a Wolves team that is going to enter the playoffs with expectations and pressure.
Absolutely not. Not even close.
And they're going to find that world as the number 1 or number 2 or number 3 seed is a different world of scrutiny and pressure. And if that first round series, whoever it is against, is 1-1 or they're down 2-1, it's going to get loud and nasty real fast. But if there are 2 concerns about their ability to withstand that in the playoffs, I think the cliche concern would be, well, Rudy gets played off the floor by small ball lineups in the playoffs. That's actually not the one I'm concerned about. We'll get to my concern later. You wrote about why that is perhaps a fallacy based on what happened when the Clippers played the Jazz in the sort of nadir of that era for the Jazz. Expound upon that, please.
Right. So there is this long running theory that Rudy Gobert is so limited offensively and kind of this big, slower guy on defense that you can go small with him and play him off the floor or render him completely ineffective. And that the kind of flashbulb moment of that is Game 6 against the Los Angeles Clippers, Western Conference semifinals in 2021. And the Jazz had a 2-0 lead to open that series. They were number 1 in the West. They were favored in that series. They opened at 2-0. Ty Lue changes some things up with his rotations, goes a little smaller, and the Clippers come back and they win 3 in a row. And then they go into Game 6. They put Terrence Mann in the starting lineup. At that point, we didn't really know Terrence Mann that well. He's averaging 7 points a game. He was shooting 40% from 3 on very low volume, but basically the Utah Jazz strategy was we're going to put Gobert on Mann in this very small lineup, and that will allow him to linger a little closer to the rim, stop the penetration from Paul George and Reggie Jackson that was absolutely killing them, and you just dare Terrence Mann to beat you. Well, he did. He hit 7 of 10 3-pointers. You could see over and over in that game, Rudy Gobert sort of caught in no man's land. Does he get out to contest the 3 from Mann? Does he stay at the rim and try and shut off the penetration? And it was just drive and kick. Man, 39 points. Clippers come back to win, and that brought a ton of scrutiny onto Rudy Gobert. Look at this guy. He can't perform in the playoffs against small ball lineups.
He's an oaf. He
can't move. Yes. And what Utah people, members of the Jazz organization, people who are around that team a lot, told me after the trade was that actually Rudy Gobert was the one that was covering everyone on the court. And, Donovan Mitchell, Jordan Clarkson, Bojan Bogdanovic, guys on the perimeter could not guard for Utah. And so Rudy was having to just cover everything, and it was not working. And the difference here, and what Rudy talked about after beating the Clippers on Sunday, was that he has people on the Timberwolves who guard on the perimeter. And you have Jaden McDaniels, you have Anthony Edwards, Mike Conley knows where to be. Karl-Anthony Towns is actually having his best defensive season as a power forward. You have Nickeil Alexander-Walker, you have Kyle Anderson. All of these guys can take pressure off and eliminate the penetration. That allows Rudy to not have to do 5 things at once. And so now you are seeing him close out on Paul George on the perimeter and actually look okay in that. Now you're seeing him block more shots at the rim because he's able to stay home and doesn't have to worry about getting elsewhere. And so the Timberwolves have this really nice, the Utah Jazz were built great around Rudy Gobert offensively. That was a perfect offense for him. This is the perfect defense for Rudy Gobert in Minnesota. And that's what gives the Timberwolves hope that maybe they can change that narrative in the playoffs, that maybe they will not be able to be neutralized as quickly as those Jazz teams were.
So the other difference, it's not just that that Minnesota has vastly better defensive players individually than those Jazz teams did. And those Jazz teams had, Joe Ingles, Bojan Bogdanovic, guys who were heady and smart, but sometimes against quicker guys who were low overmatched. Smaller guards, all that stuff. Donovan Mitchell was a disaster in some of those playoff series defensively. The Wolves are also enormous, like across the board, enormous. And what that means is the driving lanes are a little smaller. And sometimes, so Jaden McDaniels can rotate, can kind of half rotate, lunge over, and then get back. And all of a sudden, he's back in front of you, and that driving lane you thought was there is not there. So that's one drive where Rudy Gobert, if you're playing 5 out, doesn't have to come from the corner to the rim. He could stay in the corner. And everyone has to cover less space because all 4 of the 5 players other than Conley are giant for their positions. I mean, Anthony Edwards is a big 2-guard. Jaden McDaniels is enormous for a wing. And Rudy, to his credit, has gotten, I think, more aggressive at, if you put a smaller guy on him or he has a smaller guy in transition, he's running to the rim and sealing with kind of a new ferocity and polish that you used to only see when he would play for the French national team. And the Wolves will throw him the ball. And yeah, sometimes it don't look pretty. Like he'll bring the ball down and pump and lurch around a little bit. But if you got a guard on him, he will go up and just dunk. It might take a couple of, gathers and whatever. And maybe he'll get fouled. And I know he struggled. What is he at 65%? He's not like a horrible foul shooter. And the Wolves, and I think that's important. Like Reggie Jackson, Terrence Mann, those guys got away with guarding him, partly because he wasn't sealing as aggressively, and partly because the Jazz would just not throw him the ball. They didn't trust him. The Wolves trust him a little bit more. And he's generally, I think, again, he can be a little awkward and turnover prone, but he's generally paid that trust back.
Right. And last year, Zach, they did not trust him. Anthony Edwards wouldn't throw him the ball in the playoffs because they just didn't have the chemistry and trust built up. This year, it's a lot different. Karl-Anthony Towns has been at the forefront of that. He has been one of the most willing passers to Rudy Gobert on this team. And he has thrown him lobs. He's thrown him entry passes. He has really kind of helped bring Rudy along from an offensive standpoint. And that chemistry is getting to be pretty good. Anthony Edwards is now throwing him the ball a little bit more, which is a plus coming off of the penetration that he can create. And Rudy is getting more confident, as you said, Zach, in doing things to make himself an offensive threat. His shooting percentages are down in comparison to the record-setting years he was having right before he came here. He was 71% from the field when he came to Minnesota in his last season in Utah. He's at like 63% right now, but he's trying little jump hooks. He is getting to the basket, backing them in. He has 122 dunks this season. I think that's second most in the NBA right now. I'm not sure if that's updated or not yet, but right around there. So he's being really aggressive going to the rim. And he is becoming someone that you cannot just ignore. And that's going to be crucial to their playoff hopes because he is going to see a lot of Drew Holiday on him if they were ever to make the finals, like smalls that will try and rotate and hope that he cannot burn them. And they're going to have to find ways to make that work. Kyle Anderson and Kat throwing him that lob on the little half penetration has been really effective for them.
God, I love slow-mo. I love everything about slow-mo. So you said a lot of things there. Rudy, jump hooks.
Yes, I know. It's not, and he's actually taken a couple of little jumpers.
No. I'm not rubbing my eyes because I minded. I was rubbing my eyes to jog my brain what I was going to say.
Yeah.
He'll also bring the ball up in transition, which is quite an NBA adventure. And yes. I assume that's one of those no, yes kind of things where Chris Finch has just learned to be like, you know what? We asked this dude to do a lot of dirty work on defense. He doesn't get to have that much fun with the ball. If he grabs and goes, we just got to let it ride. We got to ride the roller coaster and see where it ends up. And sometimes it ends up actually kind of well. And sometimes it ends up with is there a guard nearby? Give the ball to the guard, please. The second thing you mentioned, Kat, and I've talked a lot on this podcast about Kat's adaptability. And you wrote about this the other day about Karl kind of finding his new water level as a second option. But it's actually quite a hard needle to thread when you think about it. He's now the second option. Anthony Edwards is the first option. And he's the second option on a team where he's playing with a traditional center who owns the paint. That's hard for a guy who's played a lot of five to adjust to, and he's done well. My question for you is this. We all know this is a very strange situation, and there have not been many like it in NBA history, where they have this financial sword of Damocles hanging over their heads all season long. Everybody knows it. I assume even the players who are quite good at kind of blocking out cap stuff and trade stuff and all that, I assume they all know it on some level. They have $170 million committed to 6 guys next year. Kat, Ant, Naz Reid, who's amazing, Rudy Gobert, Jaden McDaniels, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who's one of their 3 critical bench players. That's basically you're at the tax for 6 guys. We all know this. Everybody knows this. The world knows it. That doesn't include Kyle Anderson. It doesn't include a point guard, unless you count Alexander-Walker, who's kind of their backup point guard right now. Doesn't include Mike Conley, obviously. Do they just not talk about it? Like, is it one of these things where everyone's agreed, like, no, we're just not talking about it for the rest of the year? We all know it. Like, Carl must know on some level, if this goes badly in the playoffs, I'm the most likely out here because that's just the reality of it. But is it like Voldemort? Just nobody says it, nobody talks about it?
Yeah, I think it's the players have done a good job of not acknowledging it. Carl absolutely understands the dynamics that are at play here, and he knows that there's plenty of chatter about trades and the future of this team and all of those things. But I think right now, because of the level of success that they're having on their court, they're able to shut that out a little bit more. If they were their typical Timberwolves that were hanging around the play-in tournament type of seeding and scratching and clawing, I think you would feel a lot more pressure internally in the locker room. And then I think the other part that it has allowed the players and coaches to really not make that front and center is that it's still, you really just don't know how this whole ownership situation is going to play out. For those who are unfamiliar, Glenn Taylor has agreed to sell the team to Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lowry. They have Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lowry have until March, I believe, to make their final payment and then go through legal approval to become majority owners of this team. And all signs are that it's going in that direction and that things are going to play out that way. But we haven't seen what Lauri and A-Rod want to do and how financially aggressive they're going to want to be. If this team goes to the NBA Finals, can I see this team paying a big tax and trying to ride it out for a year or two? Yes, I can. If the team flames out early on in the first round of the playoffs and gets upset, yeah, then I think there are going to be real hard questions to ask and probably going to be some changes that are made. But I think most of the players have just put that out of their mind right now and said, we have, for Cat, he's been here 9 years and he's lost a lot and he's been through a lot of dysfunction. And so there's a part of him that's sort of enjoying this moment right now of real success and kind of showing the rest of the league that he can be impactful on a very good team. And however it shakes out, it shakes out. But I have not sensed anything really within the team that says, we're on borrowed time here. I think they're just going to let it all play out and see what happens.
So a number of people have cautioned me this, front office executives from other teams, to be clear, said, everyone's talking about this tax issue. I've called it the financial sword of Damocles. Like, that tax, they don't have to pay that tax until next season is over.
Exactly.
So, like, you can go into next season way over the tax and see what life looks like in January, a year from now, and figure it out ahead of the trade deadline. It's not like this summer they have to preemptively get under the tax. It would be helpful, but they don't have to. Number two, obviously, it goes without saying, I'm just going to be crystal clear, they're not doing any cost-cutting trade this season. The team is too good. They're going to ride this out and see what happens. Number three, you said, if this team makes the finals, do you pay a tax bill? If the answer is not yes to that, like if this team makes the NBA Finals, do you keep everyone together and pay the tax and build the team around? If the answer is not yes, the new owners should sell the team immediately. Okay. Right. Because if the team makes the finals, you just keep you keep all the core guys and you try to make the finals again. That's it. By the way, this is how broken my brain is. Just every time anyone, and it just happened with you, says the words Alex Rodriguez, the first thing I think of is Bronson Arroyo. Still to this day, 20 years later, I think of Alex Rodriguez cheating like a typical New York Yankee cheat, trying to knock the ball out of Bronson Arroyo's hands at first base in the greatest comeback in the history of sports. And then apoplectic, like an NBA player, actually, like who I didn't foul anybody. What is the replay shows that I clotheslined the guy in the head? Well, I didn't do anything. A-Rod, I will never I don't know where Bronson Arroyo is today. He could be the manager of the Red Sox for all I know. All I can think about with A-Rod is, and I don't know if my dad is a lifelong New Hampshire native, lifelong Red Sox fan.
Yes.
And I grew up a Mets fan because they were the local team. And my dad cautioned me against liking the Red Sox. I wanted to like the Red Sox because they were his team. And he's like, it's just misery. Just don't pick the Yankees. Pick a National League team. picked the Mets. And so I picked the Mets. And that 2004 run, we're getting very sidetracked here. That was the most fun I've ever had as a sports fan, and they weren't even my team. Because I just wanted my dad to see the Red Sox win one time. I mean, like, you didn't know that they were going to win. What, if they won 3 or 4 more times since then? I was covering I was on the night police beat for the Stamford Advocate newspaper. And I told them all, as long as the Red Sox are alive in this series, I'm leaving work early and watching the last 3 innings of these games with my dad. And because he lived about 15 minutes away from the newspaper. And I did. And I was speeding into my parents' driveway and listening to the radio call when A-Rod knocked the ball out of Arroyo's hands. And I could hear John Miller's voice, I believe it was John Miller on the national call, saying, "A catastrophe for the Red Sox," because it looked like they had blown it. And I'm running in the house trying to figure out what had happened. And that's what had happened. Okay, John, sorry.
Well, I can just say, Zach, real quickly, like, you're the only person I've ever heard who has anything bad to say about A-Rod. So this is like very, very unique on that part. So
it was the most fun I've ever had. Watching my dad get to see the Red Sox one was the best thing ever. I mentioned before that there were 2 concerns about the Wolves' playoff viability, contender finals viability, and one we addressed and dismissed. The one that's actually concerning to me is that their offense is 20th. And we're halfway through the season now, and this is a bottom 12 NBA offense. They are 28th in turnover rate, just maddening turnovers. And it's easy to say, well, if they just correct that, everything's fine, because they're shooting well from 3. They take generally pretty good shots. They have sacrificed offensive rebounding for transition defense, which is a trade-off that has actually worked. Like, their transition defense has gone from horrible to really, really good. It's not so much the turnovers that concern me as when it gets down to gut check time in the playoffs. It's, do I trust the collective decision-making of this team? And specifically, do I trust Edwards and Towns with the ball in their hands to make the right play almost every time? And that sounds crazy because Anthony Edwards has been a great crunch time shot maker and will continue to be. He can get a little shot happy, and Chris Finch has talked about this. He talked about this after one of their recent games. Sometimes the right play for him is the easy pass, the simple play, draw, kick, let the offense move, and sometimes the ball will get back to you instead of forcing your 3rd straight step back 20-footer, as awesome as those are when they go in. And Cat just gets like weird turnover-itis, or foul-itis sometimes, but turnover-itis in big games. That's where Conley comes in as a stabilizer. And when you watch this team, every time they get a little off kilter, you've seen it, they call the same play. Conley Gobert, side pick and roll, no empty side pick and roll. It's their settle down play. So what I'm asking you is, what is the temperature take on this offense? What has to happen for this? Because 20th, look, they can get real far in the playoffs because their defense is so good. At some point, that offense is going to has to become a little cleaner for them to get where they want to go.
Yeah, it's been a constant conversation all season long, and Chris Finch has expressed some frustration, exasperation at times with decision making and turnovers, because when you look at their raw numbers, you can look at it, and right now, Zach, they are 6th in the NBA in field goal percentage. They are 3rd in the NBA in 3-point percentage.
They're actually 2nd if you exclude garbage time and heaves on cleaning the glass. They're 2nd. Like,
there you go.
They're shooting the hell out of it.
In clutch situations, best winning percentage in the league. They're 12-4. Their field goal percentage is 3rd in clutch situations, 50%. Their 3-point percentage is 7. So when they get shots, they get the shots that they want and they make them. But they turn the ball over too much, and the offensive rebounding has not been great for reasons you articulated. So their field goal attempts are dead last in the league. They don't take enough shots. Every game, their opponent is taking 10, 12, 13 more shots per game.
The one caveat is they get to the free throw line a lot, which depresses their raw field goal attempts. But generally, you're right. The field goal, it's funny that sometimes you just look at the simplest stats, like how many shots did you take? It's like, that seems like a problem.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so what they are trying to do, and what Chris Finch and Mike Conley in particular if you go into the locker room after most games, Mike Conley is talking to Anthony Edwards, and they're just going over situations and scenarios. Chris Finch goes over it with him in film sessions, and they are trying to get a 22-year-old to kind of expedite the learning curve and get to a spot where he is trusting his teammates to get off of the ball when the double comes, because it comes often in that situation, and trust that it's going to come back to him in a better position. And I think we're starting to see more of that lately. Kawhi Leonard even talked about it after the Clippers game, about how patient Anthony Edwards was in that game. And patience is going to be the key, because he can get trigger happy when he doesn't get a shot up in 2-3 minutes. He wants to get it going. And sometimes it's great. Sometimes he makes unbelievable contested shots. His bank shot mid-range game is such a weapon.
The bank shot is just ridiculous. I said this last week. I don't think any player has ever made a bigger year-to-year improvement in bank shots than Anthony Edwards. He's banking these shots like from almost the sideline on purpose. It's like crazy.
From 18 feet. Yeah, it's unbelievable. And that is what, Zach, gives the Timberwolves confidence that they can iron this out over the course of the season, because he has proven to be so coachable. In that Denver playoff loss last year, he looked at it and said, I need to be more multifaceted in terms of getting buckets in crunch time. So all summer long, he worked on that bank shot. He worked on that mid-range game, and he's been really good in that respect. Now it's about making the right decision. It's about doing that over and over again. And with Cat, that's going to be a challenge for him, because I do think that he gets excited in those moments, and sometimes a little bit he wants to make a great play instead of just the solid play, and that is a problem for this offense. And so all over and over again, that just underscores the importance of Mike Conley. Chris Finch has said it after 7 or 8 games this year. I need to get the ball in Mike's hands more. I need to put the ball in his hands late in games. And he is the one that quarterbacks this thing and either gets a shot for himself, gets a lob for Rudy, gets something good for the Timberwolves. But eventually they have to be not as reliant on 36-year-old Mike Conley. They have to be reliant on their 2 stars. And I think that's still very much a work in progress.
You said the words learning curve, which I thought was very apt, because that was the bet in the Gobert trade. As much as it was a bet on Gobert, and boy, was it a bet. It was a bet on like, all right, we got to win immediately. Like, that's the bet we just made. Rudy Gobert is almost 30. We gave up every first-round pick in perpetuity, essentially, for him. If we're going to win big, this 21-year-old kid's got to be the number 1 option in big playoff games, and he's got to be steady enough to do it. That's the bet. And the thing about Ant is, he's actually a good passer when he engages that part of his game. And it doesn't have to be tricky. It's just this: when you get the pick and roll, 2 come to you, the corner guy's open, just make that pass. The guy on the wing's open because they're sloughing off him, just make that pass. Let Jaden McDaniels attack a diagonal. And Chris Finch has talked about how Jaden is kind of the bellwether for their offense. When he starts to get closeouts to attack, he's become pretty good at it. Like, if you give him a defender running him off the arc, he can pump and go and finish at the rim, make the next pass. That's when they start to get rolling a little bit in a way that is harder to guard. Even like, I think it was Terrence Mann maybe against the Clippers. Ant had a post up late in that game where he scored like a little 8-foot jumper. And I just bookmarked it. Like, it was against a smaller player. That's why I think maybe it was Mann. I don't know who it was. And I bookmarked it in my head because I remember talking before last season with Ant about his post game, about how he had very few post touches, and he's a big 2 guard. He's going to get chances, particularly because that was coming off the playoff series against Memphis when he hunted Morant a lot and tried to get that matchup. And he talked about, like, I want to build that part of my game. And it hasn't really happened. And part of the reason it hasn't really happened is, like, they got 2 big guys who are inside all the time. Like, but part of the reason I like that for him is not necessarily the scoring. It's an easy way to draw 2 and see the whole floor in front of you and unlock a little bit of his passing. So I just bookmarked that. That's all. Yeah,
he for all of his charisma, for all of his kind of funny sayings in after games and the youth that comes out and when you talk to him after games and this exuberance and stuff, he is very coachable and smart in terms of what he needs to do on the floor and how he can get better and attack weaknesses. And there are very few players on this team, Zach, that will absorb criticism or scrutiny and do it in the right way. He doesn't get defensive about it. He takes it in from the people that he trusts. He thinks about it and he finds a way to fix it. And it doesn't happen overnight, but in general, when you are emphasizing something with him, when you do it one game, in 2 or 3 games, you can say, okay, he's working on this. He is understanding the problem here. And so we even saw it with the turnovers late against the Clippers. One rushed shot, one throwaway in transition, just like that's still a 22-year-old that wants to go for the kill shot all of the time. He loves to stick the dagger in, and that is admirable. It's a great quality for a number 1 offensive player to have, but there's also a way to find the right spot so that you can make sure you make contact there instead of flailing, and he's still working on that part of it.
Real quick, one of the reasons to really like this team, there's a stability to its base. Like its floor is pretty high game to game because of its defense, because it has a very set in stone 8-man rotation. The starting 5, then Naz Reid, Kyle Anderson, and Alexander Walker off the bench. And if you just look at, I looked at all their different big man combinations, all pairs of Cat Gobert, Cat Reid, Reid Gobert, the 3 of them, each one as the only big man, which is rare. They don't do that much. They're all very
really
solidly positive, except for Naz Reid as the only big man on the floor, which is not something you're going to see all that much. So everything they're doing is working pretty well. Those 3 guys are rock solid bench players. The 9th guy has, like, Troy Brown Jr. has come in and give them some good games. Jordan McLaughlin, like, made his midseason cameo, then annual midseason cameo, give them some good games. They have Shake Milton hasn't been what they hoped for, but he's sitting there just in case. That's a 8-man rotation is great. They don't have a lot of stuff to trade. Is there a move on the margins that you expect them to make or try to make?
I do expect them to be very active in having conversations. Now, you're right. It's not going to, I don't think it's going to be for a major move, but there are areas that they know that they need to address. One is, do you need a backup point guard for Mike Conley? They're going to be playing a ton of back-to-backs over this second half of the season.
Yeah, they've only played 39 games. They played one of the fewest games right now.
And one of the fewest numbers of back-to-backs as well. And that's all going to catch up with them in the second half of the season. So do you need someone to steady that out and be more reliable there? That's one area. And then I think the other area is some sort of bucket getter in that second unit, because they wanted Shake Milton to be that. Maybe he can still eventually become that, but he's just really hasn't shot the ball well at all. And so is it, do they go out and try and find someone like that who can give you more offense from the perimeter, and especially from the 3-point range, because this team doesn't shoot a lot of threes. They make 38% of their threes, but they only shoot 31 a game. And they need to get that volume up if they're going to kind of help this offense improve from 20th into 15-10 area. They have to shoot more threes. Karl-Anthony Towns has to shoot more threes, but finding a bench scorer that could do that for them and come out and outside Naz Reid, give them 12, 15 points in a game, I think is something that they're going to look really hard at as the deadline approaches here.
Look, here's where we are. The West is there for them. Like,
it is.
Like the Lakers, unless the Suns like really figure it out and become the team that everyone feared, we'll see. The Lakers, they might figure some stuff out. They started this new old lineup last night. Like, maybe that works for them, maybe it doesn't. They don't appear to be on track to figuring it out in like a big, super dangerous way. Now, you never underestimate them in a playoff setting with those 2 dudes at the top of their roster. The Warriors don't appear to be anywhere close to figuring anything out. The Thunder are awesome. They have the 2nd best net rating in the league, the best net rating in the Western Conference. They're also young. Like, we'll see how they do in their first go around of the playoffs. I think they're really, really good. The Clippers loom as like, oh my God, Are they like when you factor in experience, are they like becoming the favorite in the West? Maybe we'll see. Like we know what James Harden's done in the playoffs. I love what the Clippers have been doing lately. I'm excited to go to their game tonight. But this is there for minutes. Like I'll tell you right now, unless this offense stabilizes a little bit, they will not be my pick to win the Western Conference in the playoffs. I just can't trust their offense. But they have 40 games to iron it out, and it's there for them. Like if they can just get this a little cleaner, there's a pathway where they can make the finals, like 100% for sure.
It's wide open that way, and I can tell you that the people in the organization feel that too, Zach. They know that this is a very rare moment for this franchise from 1 through 8, like you said. From a talent standpoint, they are not going to be looking up at many teams that they play game in and game out, and certainly not even in the playoffs. And that is where I do think I'm going to be interested to see Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lowry and how they operate going into this trade deadline, because they have been aggressive. They went out and paid a bunch of money for Tim Connolly. They okayed the Rudy Gobert deal. And so they have shown that they're going to go after things when it's right there. And I believe that this organization thinks that this opportunity is there for them, that this window is open for the next year or two. And so it wouldn't surprise me at all for them to be aggressive at the deadline, but they also know that they have put together a squad that can make a really deep run in the playoffs. And that is something that just doesn't happen here. I'll just give you this one stat, Zach, that I want. On November 30th, they were 15-4. They were the outright number 1 seed in the West for 10 days in a row at that point. In their previous 34 years of existence, they had been the outright number 1 seed in the West for 10 days. They have held that since then. It's like 57 days now. Now they've had a tie here or there with OKC, but for the majority of it, they've been here. This is how rare this success is for this franchise. And I don't think that anyone here wants to let that slip away.
Just don't jinx it, John. Just don't jinx it.
That's what I do. It seems what I do in 20 years on this beat. So.
All right, Jon Krawczynski, look, there's just nobody better covering a team than John. Read everything he does covering the Wolves and the general NBA. We didn't get to talk about it. You have an absolutely beautiful story about Ricky Rubio, who just announced his retirement from the NBA a couple weeks ago, and his time in Minnesota. Just like knockout coverage across the board. Thank you for lending us some of your time, and hopefully I'll see you soon.
Anytime, Zach. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's round this out with a Southwest Division, more Southwest Division. I think it's the Southwest Division. I don't even know. Running to the airport.
Yes.
Formerly our New Orleans Pelicans / Zion beat reporter, still on that beat kind of, but now is shifted into Texas on the Wemby beat, has a piece out this week on Victor Wembanyama playing center over the last 6 weeks for the Spurs and what that's done. Andrew Lopez, how are you?
I am warmer than the rest of San Antonio, mostly because I am in Atlanta on this Spurs five-game road trip before, so headed to Boston. I think in a couple of hours, so a little warmer than most Spurs fans right now.
It's fun vindication for those of us who have been baffled all season by Greg Popovich's refusal to start Trey Jones and play him with Victor Wembanyama. Like I literally was like, I don't know what the hell Trey Jones did, but now it works. I think their net rating is like still slightly positive for the season. Oh my God, who knew a real point guard could help the San Antonio Spurs?
It was kind of funny because the Trey minutes started fantastic. They were one of the only net ratings that they had that was positive through the first couple of weeks of the season.
Dude, you know how hard it is to have a positive net rating for any duo that plays a lot of minutes on a team that's flirting with the worst net rating in like almost modern NBA history. You know how hard that is?
It is very hard. And the fact that they were able to do that, it took a dip. I want to say like late November, early December, and then every lineup just looked bad at that point. But now they've started to figure some things out. Trey looks great right now. I think it's the only 2-man lineups with Victor that are positive ratings right now are Trey at +4.5, and I think now Devin Vassell, and I think that's 0.5 right now. I think they got a lot of that back after being benched yesterday to start the second half in Atlanta. But I mean, things are trending the right way, and it all kind of started with we should probably just play Vic at center.
Yeah. And I don't want to bury the lead. Let's just talk about it. Wembanyama. He's incredible. It turns out he's absolutely incredible. I've been saying all year, like, forget the shooting inefficiencies and off of whatever stat. The crazy thing about him is even when they were playing him at the 4 defensively on the wing, he's so goddamn big and long and fast that he still had a massive impact. Like, I didn't think they were sacrificing that much defensively by having him on the wing instead of in the middle where he is now, and his rim protection is like massively effective because he's just an all court wrecking crew by himself. But the biggest thing that you detailed is his shots, not selection, just the shots he's getting.
His quality.
So many more of them are at the rim. So many fewer of them are threes, which he's under 30%, I think, for the season, and long twos. And you saw in that Hawks game, you mentioned they benched 3 starters. Then they brought him back in, and Wemby made 11 consecutive shots, one more terrifying than the next, or each more terrifying than the last, whatever is appropriate. And you see it in transition almost more than the half court, but the Spurs ball handlers, and like, I don't even think Vassell has had that great of a season on either end of the floor flanker. I think his development on defense has been a little disappointing. I still think he's easily the second most important Spur long term, and I'm a big fan, but like, I haven't loved his season. But he and Trey Jones and others are like, oh, we just throw the ball. Like, and that's the thing about Wemby is you think putting him at center is like he's going to be Tyson Chandler getting these like pick and roll lob dunks.
Right.
And he'll get some of those, but sometimes, and this is very handy for a bad team, you don't even have to like run anything or do any action that compromises the defense at all and puts them in rotation. And then with 6 on the shot clock, you just be like, let's just throw it up into the middle and that dude will catch it. Or in transition, just heave it up and that dude will catch it. And they're doing more of that.
The transition yesterday or against the Hawks was the thing that kind of stood out to me the most, because that's when they're starting to figure out more and more, because there was a little bit of a lull where you have this 7'4", 7'5" guy running down the court, or he's got position on somebody, and they weren't throwing the lobs. And it's like, what is happening? And we asked him about this a couple of weeks ago. He goes, oh, I heard it. I heard what you're saying. He goes, you know, with all the everybody else is saying about my teammates don't want to throw me the ball. He's like, that's fine. He's like, we all understand. We're all on the same page. And then slowly but surely, they have started to realize, oh, yeah, let's just get it to the 7'4" guy around the rim. Sometimes that results in turnovers, but more often than not, it results in Wemby at least catching it. And against the Hawks, it was 3 or 4 straight times, including, like you said, in transition. There were at least 2, maybe 3, where he just outran Capella down the court. Just made basket by the Hawks, and they're getting oops on the other end.
Caw-caw. That's my sad caw for the Hawks. Caw-caw.
So they're starting to figure it out more in pick and rolls. They're starting to figure it out. There was a few against the Hornets the other night where I think it was 2 or 3 in a row. Maybe it might have been 3 in a row where they just oop layup. Oh, I can get this dunk now because you overplayed the oop. So they're starting to learn more about him, and he's enjoying this. He's embracing it. He likes, like, I remember it was back in the preseason when a reporter asked him a question about whether or not you would like to be the screen setter or having the screen set for you as the center. And he's like, I'm not a center. He stopped it right there. He said, I'm not a center, but, and then continued on with his answer. He said that back at the draft. He said that several times, even when we've talked to him about it. However, he's like, this was in the article we had up on Monday. I can be the center. I might be the 5 on paper, but I could play the 1 30% of the time. When we played the Pistons and I had the triple-double, I was the 1. When we played the Hornets, I was the 5. He goes, I like that. So he is embracing the role just as much as anything else.
To me, his position is more relevant, as is the case for most players, on defense. You are who you guard. And if he's guarding the 5 on the other team, that means he's around the basket. And if he's around the basket, that means he's blotting out everything. 1 million feet of space around the rim, and you can't even see the goddamn basket when you get in there. Offensively, he's correct. Like, he'll run an inverted pick and roll. He'll like bring the ball up and be like, okay, Jetty Osman, you're around. Come screen for me. And I'm calling it right now, by the way. The next 5x5 game in the NBA, which is more than 5 points, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks, is going to be Wembanyama. He will be the next 5. I don't think there's been one. We did this a couple weeks ago. I think Nurkic has the last one.
Yeah, Nurkic has the last one. And I think it was like a 2020 game. Like, it was an insane game from Nurkic.
I think Wemby's doing it, and because you nailed it, I think the biggest, I don't know if it's a surprise because you saw some of it in Europe, but the biggest, almost as much as the shot distribution, moving to center has really unlocked his passing, and he might be the second best passer on the team after Trey Jones, and like considering his position, his passes are sort of equally powerful and valuable because when he's at the 5 and he's handling the ball at the elbow, that means the center is at the elbow, the opposing center, and there's no shot blocking. And like you start cutting and moving, and like you can see him in the way he directs cutters, in the way he sometimes gets a little cranky when somebody doesn't cut. He reads the game faster than most rookies ever will read the game, faster than a lot of his veteran teammates. Like, that's the most encouraging sign to me, is how quickly, like, he's a step ahead on offense. And that's going to translate to defense. And look, there's not a lot of reasons to watch the Spurs. Obviously, there's one big one, and he's been every bit the superstar rookie that people expected.
When he's coming back on, there's many times a game, and this always doesn't get shown on the broadcast, but when you're in the arena and you see it, he's always talking to teammates. He's always talking. He's always either congratulating them on something or, hey, you cut here. He'll get in guys' faces. He wants to be that guy. And I think as much as that, he wants to be coached, he wants his teammates to learn. He is all about just trying everything out. And I think that's what this season has been all about. When you start Jeremy Sohan at point guard for 20 games, it's about experimentation. It's about trying to figure out what happened.
I erased that from my brain, so I don't want to talk about it.
He's now playing small ball 5 at times, which I think is also great. I want to know what ends up being more. Is he end up the point guard in more minutes this year or the small ball 5? But they're just throwing everything, and it's like every 5 or 10 games, it's like, okay, does this work? No. All right, let's try it. Hey, does this work? Yes, we're keeping it. So this is the year to experiment. I think Victor's on board with that. So just keep throwing stuff at the wall and see what sticks.
And by the way, to be clear, I like Sohan. He shot the ball well this year.
Yes.
He's an incredibly high IQ connector kind of player. I just don't want him to play point guard now or for the foreseeable future. Just very quickly on the Spurs, Wembanyama deserves a lot of credit for accepting the move to center, because the whole point of Zach Collins as a starter was we're going to protect Wembanyama from the physicality of playing center. And it's become kind of in vogue to say, well, there are no physical centers. There are no post-up centers. It's Embiid and Jokic, and then who really cares? And if you're looking at scoring, like old school back to the basket scoring, that's kind of true. But if you're looking at just like what it feels like to box these dudes out, it's still Valanciunas, Nurkic, Gobert. I mean, Steven Adams isn't even healthy. Jokic. I mean, we can go on. There's a million big, burly, mean centers. That's just the West alone, and like he deserves a lot of credit for being like, I'll deal. Like it's gonna hurt, but I'll deal. Last thing on the Spurs and point guard, I said last week that they had some talks with Atlanta about a Dejounte Murray do-over. Basically, I don't think those got very far because I just think Atlanta's in a tough spot. With teams trying to lowball them on Murray. And I was talking to someone from another team last week about the Spurs and this guard. I was talking to a few people, and like, if I'm them, that little tidbit tells me, A, they know they have a problem. B, they're willing to sign someone who is way outside of Victor Wembanyama's age curve just to be kind of a bridge player, kind of like how the Utah Jazz chased Drew Holiday in the offseason before the Celtics got him. And I think that's smart. And I started to go through with these guys, like, who's a list of guards they could get or they would be looking at? And it, like, in impact guards, not like, this little backup here. Let's add the other Jones brother there. Here are just some names that we kind of spitballed. Josh Giddey. Now, I don't think that's anytime soon or this year. Right. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be resolved there. I think, Drew Holiday is worth looking at, depending on what happens with the Celtics. I expect him to stay there, but who knows? I would be monitoring if I were the Spurs. Jaden Ivey, just like
Yes.
if he ever shakes loose in Detroit, not like a traditional pass first kind of point guard, but I'd just be monitoring it as a talent play. And a little under the radar one that, again, if he shakes loose, I mentioned this team with Tim MacMahon on Siakam. If he shakes loose somehow, I think Andrew Nebhard is like a decent starting point guard kind of waiting to happen in the NBA. And other than that, it's like, Tyler Hero, if you become a third team in some trade, if Miami ever makes the blockbuster trade, I'd be monitoring the Blazers, like with Anthony Simons, like what do they do with the Simons, Sharp, Scoot Henderson trio? Markelle Fultz is kind of I don't think I want to add a non-shooting point guard as dynamic as he can be. But I just thought it was worth noting that that they looked at Murray. I think that's the right mindset for them.
Yeah. And it was kind of, so I mean, obviously it was Spurs Hawks on Monday. So there was a lot of Murray talk around, and Pop even mentioned, he was asked what was his relationship like with Dejounte Murray, because Dejounte Murray did not have the cleanest exit out of San Antonio. He went on some pot. He said some things, but when you talk to people yesterday, you talk to people, for the last couple of weeks or last week or so, I guess, it's, hey, I love my time being there. I looked up Pop as like a father figure. He said that. I think it was when we talked to Pop about it, Pop's like, I talk to Dejounte all the time about things, just checking in on life. He was a kid. He was learning. He did this and this here. So it would initially, it kind of, it didn't make as much sense to me because, like you mentioned, the timeline, Dejounte's just, he doesn't seem like he fits the timeline the same. But I think the fact that there's still many people in the Spurs organization that think highly of him, I could see if something were there. I like the Jaden Ivey one. I think I like that a lot. I think you're still looking for more guys. I don't necessarily think, even if you have just one guy, and I think this is what they try to do right now. If you have just your one point guard and Trey Jones, if you're still looking for another lead guard, it could just be somebody who he can be a passer when he needs to. But if you're going to end up running some offense through Victor and let him get to be a 5, 6, 7 assist guy a game, maybe your other guy can just be a shooter. You want somebody out there who can just be able to make shots. And I think that's some of what they tried this year, some of these lineup combinations, but we'll see what happens.
I'm also interested in the future of Keldon Johnson in San Antonio on a good contract now coming off the bench, but that's a story for a different day. Let's switch back to your old team / always part of your soul, Andrew Lopez.
Always.
The New Orleans Pelicans, who I think the national narrative left the Pelicans in Las Vegas and with the is Zion out of shape discussion when the Lakers just obliterated them and really embarrassed, truly embarrassed the Pelicans on national television in front of the whole world. And Zion embarrassed himself. There's just it was awful. Well, very quietly, they were 12-11 after that game. They're 24-17 now. So they're 12-6 since then. They are 12th in offense, 7th in defense, 7th. They're getting a little lucky on opponent three-point shooting, but still. They've played the third hardest schedule in the league, so it's not like they're fattening up on bad teams. No pun intended. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. And they're just deep as all hell. Like, they're healthy now. Larry Nance is back. He's a big-time stabilizer for them on both ends of the floor and has already closed some games over Valanciunas. Herb Jones is up to 38% on threes and is being aggressive Herb Jones. Dyson Daniels, when Dyson Daniels and Herb Jones Jr. are on the floor together, I don't even know what you're like. No one can dribble. Like it's not safe to dribble. Dyson Daniels, he probably denies people at the grocery store. Like he's denying the ball all 94 feet. Like if it's him and you for like the last grapefruit he's gonna use his shopping cart to deny you access to the grapefruit. Zion has been good. Brandon Ingram has been very good. CJ McCollum's back and is shooting 44% on three. He looks zippy to me lately. Like he's got a little bounce to his step. Jordan Hawkins has re-entered the rotation with an explosion against the Nuggets over Jose Alvarado. They have a bunch of stuff to trade. 2 Bucks picks, the Laker deferral pick, which is one of the most fun little soap operas in the league. I have described this team as a sleeping giant in the Western Conference. I don't even know like what they should be on the lookout for, if anything, for trades, as we've discussed many times. They're pretty well stocked across the board. But I will put it to you like this. Even when they're on a good streak like this, and this is totally separate from the Las Vegas embarrassment of 2023. There is just something about this team that you just, it's like a vibe. Like it's just a feel that you get that you don't quite trust. And I think it comes from like, they have a couple of like really, really great defenders who are shaky on offense, despite Herb's shooting recently.
Right.
Then they have a couple of incredible offensive players, Zion and CJ, who are liabilities on defense. Trey Murphy has been okay. It feels like he's still kind of finding his footing this season a little bit. Yeah. He's kind of a guy who can glue a lot of their lineups together. And then you combine the fact that they've been a complete mess in crunch time for most of the season, particularly on offense. Even when they're playing well, there's just something just like I can't quite get there trusting them. Like I think they can definitely make the playoffs and be a dangerous playoff team. Something just doesn't feel totally trustworthy about it. I want you to talk me out of it, but maybe you agree.
To me at least, it feels like they're always one injury away from something going completely bad. They were in almost identical record last year at this point. Maybe it was 24-15, I think, when Z went out against the 76ers. That was January 2nd last year. And then the free fall happened. They were third and then just dropped off. It feels like that. There's a couple of things still don't. You look at it and it doesn't make sense. It's better than what it was, but the three-man lineup, when you have CJ, Brandon, and Zion on the floor right now, is still a net negative. Minus 2-2. Their starting group is still a net negative in 260 minutes, and that's JV, Herb, Brandon, Z, and CJ. The combinations when you go, all right, when Brandon and Zion are on the floor a little bit better, or when it's Zion and CJ or Brandon and CJ, it's just they're still trying to figure out a little bit about having all three on the court at the same time.
So I wrote this when I wrote about their crunch time offense a few weeks ago in 10 things as a dislike.
Which is really bad. So bad.
I wrote something about like part of it is that they just haven't played very many minutes together, those three guys in particular. Part of it is, this is what I wrote, their skills are not that complementary. And I got a lot of pushback from people in New Orleans. Like, what do you mean they're not that complementary? They're like McCollum is a great shooter and a playmaker, and they need, like, he's been kind of a trade machine guy. Like, I don't know, man. They need, I know he's not a traditional point guard, but they need his skill set pretty badly.
100%.
And like, Zion's a supernova talent. Ingram's a supernova talent. They're both ball handlers, sure, but you know, Zion can be a screener. He can play center, although they haven't done that much. And I guess if you just watch them play, part of it is that Zion is a total non-shooter, right? And so if there's a center on the floor, which there usually is, the spacing is a little clumped, and like Zion's got to figure out how to attack the basket. JV is sometimes trying to skitter out of his way. And like Brandon Ingram is not a non-shooter. He actually shot 39% from three last year. He's at 34% this year. And that's just like not his game, spacing the floor. His game is playing with the ball. And so one of them, and it's often Zion late in games, ends up just kind of standing around, taking up space. And yesterday they lose to Dallas, another close game, Dallas without Kyrie. And if you watch that game, they ran the same set over and over, which was a Zion CJ McCollum inverted pick and roll. Great play, very powerful. Zion's awesome at that. And then CJ would flare out around a Larry Nance screen, like flare screen, right at the top of the key, top of the arc. And that's cool. And it worked a couple times. Brandon Ingram's just chilling in the left corner doing nothing. And that's part of being on a good team. Like sometimes you do nothing. He's just not that powerful of a player doing nothing. And then they were like, well, he's needs some reps. Let's put him in the Zion spot. And then Zion is standing in the corner or in the dunker spot doing nothing. And he's obviously dangerous there. A great offensive rebounder in the dunker spot. You give him a runway to rev up from the corner. He'll just go through people. It's just a little clunky, I guess. And I thank you for looking up the numbers. I had not checked the numbers, and they're still negative.
Yeah, they're still negative. There was an uptick after, like in the last month. I mean, since Vegas, everything has started to turn around. There was the team meeting, and Well, we all talk about team meetings, but this one, I mean, you talk to people around there, and it worked. And I think it started with, telling Brandon and Zion, hey, you guys are our two best players. Go act like our two best players at all times. And things started to kind of pick up from there. They're still going to struggle in clutch. They've been a little bit better. I think yesterday was maybe only their second or third clutch game since Larry Nance had come back, who had been dealing with a number of injuries, honestly, for the entire calendar year of 23.
I think that's part of it, is that Larry Nance feels very important to their team. And I love Larry Nance, 3-time guest on the Low Post podcast, just like a basketball, like he's just a very smart, high IQ, fun basketball player. He's always hurt. And I also feel like there's a little passivity to his game in big moments. Like he gets a little gun shy on offense and a little pass happy. And I'm like, sometimes you just need to shoot, man. Like, and that's part of like the trust issue I have. I have trust issues, Andrew.
I see that. And I will say, Larry back on defense, you swap him and JV out, things have gotten better. I think at that lineup, if you just replace JV with Larry Nance, it's only played about 25 minutes, but it's plus 25. But they're only really going to it late in games. It's kind of the late lineup. And then you have, you can put Trey out there. You talk about Trey. Trey, obviously, he tore his meniscus in the offseason, didn't debut until I think maybe it was the in-season tournament game. It was right around that, December 1st, I think.
It's been about a month and a half, I think.
So,
and I love Trey Murphy. Like, I think Trey Murphy has all-star potential. He's just kind of getting back into it right now.
Yeah, and I will say, if anybody was making calls to the New Orleans Pelicans and they're going for Trey, like, just don't even try. Just, you're going to get no. You're going to get told no. It doesn't matter. Hang up the phone. He did have a little bit of knee tendonitis late in December, like maybe last week, missed a couple of games. So could see him still trying to work his way back from that knee injury. But the pieces are there. If they go make a move, the only way I really see them going is maybe trying to swap out JV at center just because he's on that expiring. See what you can get for him. See what you can use pick wise.
I just don't even know like who's out there for them. Like Miles Turner was the hot name for years and years. They had really in-depth talks with the Pacers a few drafts ago. Like I don't like, why are the Pacers are good, and the Pacers, if anything, are going to try to add to their team. I think more than I don't know. He's a big part of their team, Miles Turner.
The big name that was floated kind of like training camp was Jared Allen, but I think now with that you want to see what Cleveland does, especially since they don't have Evan Mobley. It doesn't look like they're going to have Evan Mobley back until after the All-Star break, or after the trade deadline, I should say. So you're going to monitor some names, see what you can kind of go. You can get to the one good thing you have right now is you can get to a really good number between JV salary, Kyra's salary. That's already at 21 right there. If you're really going to make a splash, do you have to, which of the young guys do you really have to give up? I don't think you want to give up Herb. I don't think you want to give up Dyson. You're definitely not giving up Trey. But to give, to get something, you got to give something. And I don't know if there's just a picks-based deal.
Hawkins is good, man.
And Hawkins after his 34-point game in Dallas the first night, which the New Orleans Pelicans Twitter account dunked on our friend Mr. Tim MacMahon for saying that the Pelicans were punting that game, which I think was a fair thing when you sit CJ, Brandon, Zion, and Trey, because you get in at 4:45 in the morning when you have to play a 22 and a half hour tip difference or whatever it was. But what you're seeing there is Hawkins replaced Jose in the lineup. He can shoot. He can do everything you want on that side of the floor. You still have a lot of good numbers that you can send out. So if they want to make a splash, they can. But if they do, we'll see.
Speaking of Pelicans Twitter accounts, this is not a Pelicans Twitter account. I got a notification on my phone over the weekend. It was a direct message on Twitter. My DMs are closed, man. You can't get to me. You know where this is going?
Oh, I have a very good feeling, Mr. Zach Lowe.
You can't DM me unless I follow you. I'm like, oh, who's this? Check my phone. King Cake Baby. It's the King Cake Baby's Twitter account. Like, oh, King Cake Baby. Wonder what he's up to. The whole message is just the skull and crossbones. That's the entire message. That's it. Like, no follow-up, no, hey, happy Mardi Gras season, I'm back, my account's active. Just a skull and crossbones. And the King Cake Baby wonders why people are terrified of him. That is honestly the scariest DM that I could get, I think. I think it's the scariest possible one.
January 6th, Carnival season starts. King Cake Baby awakens.
He's
it's a short season this year.
He's like the Undertaker. He just like sits up like, oh, I'm back. He doesn't tweet for like a year, and then boom, and he's what's funny? DMing me this stuff.
I think you just gave the Pelicans their introduction video to King Cake Baby next year. They just have to put him. They have to go find a wrestling ring, put him in a ring, play Taker's music, and let him sit up. You know what? As soon as we finish this, I'm texting their people right now. Thank you, Zach Lowe, for making this happen.
Look, okay, back to the Pelicans. Look, the top 3 in the West, the top 4 in the West is set in some order. Wolves, Thunder, Nuggets, Clippers, Kings, Mavs, Pelicans, Suns, Jazz, who I just talked about with Tim, are 4-9. Like, that battle for 6 to get out of the play-in is going to be fierce. And I expect the Pelicans to be in the thick of it all season. To me, their ceiling is 5. Like, they're a game out of 5 now. I don't see why they can't get 5. And by the way,
I think they were 5 yesterday. Before the loss.
God forbid the Kings ever see the Pelicans again or in the playoffs, because the Pelicans just beat the out of them every time they play. I just want to shout out one guy. Can I shout out one Pelican?
One Pelican, go for it.
I have this list of guys who are like, I call it like, you're always happy to have them around, guys. Like, they may not play every game, although this guy does now. But when you need them, you're like, oh, this guy's like, I'm always happy he's here. He doesn't take anything away. He's a good player. Like, on that team will be Xavier Tillman. Like, doesn't play for 10 games, and like everybody on the Grizzlies gets hurt. He's like, oh, this guy's good. He can switch. He can make corners. I like him. Amir Coffey, like, out of the rotation for most of the season. Oh, Amir Coffey, I like this guy. I'm happy he's still here. Najee Marshall is the captain of my, like, I'm just happy this dude's around. Every time you need him, he makes a 3. He gets a steal. He gets a rebound. He guards everybody. He dribbles the ball up in transition like a maniac and gets you a transition bucket. I'm just happy. He's just a nice guy to have around.
His nickname in New Orleans now is The Knife, because once Willie Green was asked, oh, so-and-so is a Swiss Army knife. What does that make Najee Marshall? And he just goes, just a knife. So he is
better than a Swiss Army knife. Is that
it's more direct, because that's what Najee Marshall is. Najee Marshall can do everything, but if you just need him to cut through a defense, boom, he's doing it. You need him to, he's just going to be more direct than anything else. He is the knife. He's going to cut through. And I was talking with somebody about this here yesterday, and he's kind of their enforcer too. Like, he was kind of John, I think, with Grant Williams, got double T's yesterday. He's going to be the guy who, if somebody, put Zion on his ass, it's going to be Najee to come in and take care of business. I don't know if it's going to be like James Johnson takes care of business level, but Najee's going to be there. Najee's going to watch out for everybody.
Last thing on Zion you mentioned, I just want to, I've noticed a lot of teams. Dallas did this last night. Memphis did this in one of the Memphis comeback games, or the jaw games. Teams are putting Zion in the pick and roll a lot, especially when they know he's going to hedge because of the scheme or who the screener is. And he's very bad at that, and they're relentless with it as a way to tire him out. Just something to monitor. But this is a good team. I like this team. Interesting trade deadline team. I wanted to talk about them. Andrew Lopez, go catch your flight. Enjoy the Wemby experience, and thanks for popping on.
Oh, I'm enjoying it. Later, guys.